Hello and welcome to the show, where today our focus is very much on small businesses. Now, in the UK and Ireland, small businesses make up 99.9% of the business population, accounting for around about 60% of employment and around half of the turnover across the private sector. And that's something that is echoed across the European Union, where SMEs represent 99% of all businesses. So small businesses are really big business, right? Well, right. And unfortunately, inevitably, cybercriminals tend to agree. And rather than minding their own business, 96% of their cyber attacks are directed at small and medium-sized businesses, according to insurer CFC. So why are criminals fishing for the small fry more than trying to land the big whales? And what can corporate minnows do to protect themselves when they're being fed so much tasty-looking bait? Well, joining us, as always, to try and make sense of all of this is Meta-Compliance Chief Evangelist and author of Cybersecurity Awareness for Dummies, Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Hi, David. SMEs is a subject that I'm really interested in. It's a big problem because SMEs, by their very nature, don't have the resources that enterprises have, and I suppose I'm concerned about how government, how industry is going to help them. So I think this is going to be a good conversation. I think there's some hope on the horizon, but at the same time, it's one of those things that is going to take all of us to lend our support to ensure that the worst doesn't happen to all those important small businesses.
Hope on the horizon, but boy, are we going to have to work for it. All right, then we'll see if we can carry that thread throughout our conversation today, because joining us is our special guest for today, cybersecurity program leader, lecturer, course creator, and founder and MD of Fortify Institute, Jan Carroll. Hello, Jan. How are you doing?
Hi, David. Hi, Robert. I'm delighted to be here today. Yeah, SMEs, like, it is such a big issue, and it's so big. I've recently started a PhD to try and help figure out how do we make sure that SMEs are aware of the actual issue, because I think that's part of it, is that it's not on their radar. They don't, even if we give them all the resources and make them available on a particular website, they're not even thinking about it. They're just trying to keep the doors open for a lot of them, especially the micro SMEs, but we'll discuss more today. So yeah. Thanks.
We'll come to that in a moment, like you say, but a PhD in this actual area, that sounds fascinating. Just tell us a bit about your background, though, where you've come from to get to where you are towards this PhD, and why you've got this focus on SMEs, and also where are you calling from today? Because I'm detecting a bit of an accent there.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Dublin, and now I'm living in Meath. So so I'm in Ireland, and that's where I'm from. And yeah, but the issues are the same everywhere. So I think the plight of SMEs is across the board. Originally, I like most people, I didn't necessarily take the direct route, fairly scenic, and my background was always in IT, even as a young child. And then when I left school, I started working as an electrician. Then I started my family, and working on sites didn't really work with having a small family. So that's how I got moved into teaching. And I was always learning. I say learning, I'm a lifelong learner. That's one of my passions. So I moved into adult education, and adult education in particular, because it is quite distinct from other types of education, because usually you're dealing with people who they're coming back. It's second chance education, and you only get one. With people, you often only get one chance at that second chance, okay? Because if it doesn't work out for them, they usually don't try again. So I worked there for about 10 years, and always in the sort of IT side of things, teaching people about e-business and websites and getting them on their new path. And we were doing a session one day, and somebody said to me, we were discussing, if you had your time again, what would you do? And somebody said, Jan, if you had your time again, what would you do? And I said, I do cybersecurity. because I was just something that I was really interested in, and I thought my time had gone. But it was a real case of practice what you preach. And it was like, well, why don't I? And by the end of that week, I had enrolled on a master's program in cybersecurity. And for the next 2 years, I continued that program. And then I moved into the area. At the time, it was around GDPR was coming in about 2018. And I actually got work easy enough at the time. Whereas one of the issues a lot of people in cybersecurity have now, or moving into cybersecurity have now, is trying to get that first role. And that's something I'm working with some of the organizations with. But yeah, so I moved into cybersecurity, and I was working again for a couple of years, and then lockdown, COVID hit. Okay. And for a lot of people, I took that time to sort of reevaluate, take stock, and decide what do I want to do. And that's when I come up with the idea of starting a business. I always knew I had a business in me, and I come from a line of female entrepreneurs. My mother has a business, my grandmother had a business, and it was something I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do. And I was passionate about cybersecurity. I realized I actually missed teaching after leaving it for a couple of years, and I could see the cyber skills gap there was, and also the lack of diversity. So that's why I started Fortify Institute, to try and tackle those two issues. I wasn't long in having the company when, even though the company was set up to deliver technical training to cybersecurity professionals, I was getting a lot of contact from SMEs asking, you know, how can I help them? How can I teach them? And that's when I started working with the local enterprise offices and, you know, actually talking to people about this issue. I also had a personal insight because my mother and my sister run a hair salon. And over lockdown, like a lot of micro SMEs, they had to digitize. So they had to set up online booking systems, online systems to hold all their client data, so they're able to contact them, and they're able to do, at the time, all the COVID checks. They also had to take online payments. And that was fine when it was initially set up, and there was lots of government support and there was a lot of advice. But now we're a couple of years down the line, and a lot of those organizations aren't maintaining, or they're not even considering cyber issues, cyber risks. And there is certainly a lot of vulnerable organizations, which in turn makes us vulnerable nationally. So, and that's what the PhD focuses on. We want to figure out how do we get that information, you know, in a usable way, because they're time strapped, they're resource strapped, they're financially strapped. So it's not something that, like, the usual organizations like the consultancies aren't really addressing it because there isn't a lot of money in it.
Of course.
You know, so you've
so you've set up a small business to ostensibly help other small businesses address their cybersecurity challenges, some of which we're touching on right now, about that lack of investment, lack of time, lack of resource, and so on. Robbie, from one type of small business, and maybe we'll come on to what the definition of a small business technically is, to another. And I mean, you are the founder of I think what technically would still, under many designations, be called a small business. It's kind of up to 250 people. It seems to be at Meta Compliance, but I guess you are one company, probably more than most, that is across its cybersecurity, its information security protection measures. But you would recognize some of the challenges that many small businesses do face.
I mean, for many businesses, in fact, for all businesses, cybersecurity, and let's bring compliance in there as well with data protection, right? It's exhausting. And it is one of those things from an executive perspective that doesn't have any benefit. I mean, it has benefit in terms of managing the risk, and I understand that. Trust me, I understand that. But really, the purpose of any business is to take shareholders' money and make profit for the shareholders. That is the the purpose of capitalism in that sense. So it's like an insurance policy where you're basically, hedging your bets that something bad will happen. And then, it's for the executives of an organization, you can't cover every possible risk. Governments can't even cover every possible risk. So you have to prioritize and you have to risk accept certain things. And it's exhausting. It's something that's easier not to do than it is to do correctly. So for us, we try and do it correctly, but it's a daily challenge. It's a daily set of activities and thought processes and decisions that are at the forefront of our mind. And I think that's probably what the thrust of today's conversation is. How can you get a greater number of businesses to do the same thing? And I think, running a small business, and let's just talk about a small business. I started it with two people. So it really was a micro business to get to here. And when you say the majority of businesses in the UK, well, everybody sort of sees the household names, the Jaguar Rovers, the sort of Unilevers, and the government departments, and that's great. But those organizations have different ecosystems, completely and utterly different ecosystems to the other. And you have to take into account, we as individuals, we as citizens interact much more with all the various services that we take for granted, right? From hair salons to electricians to local supermarkets, and the majority of them are not over 250 employees. In fact, in the UK, a 250 employee, 100 employee company is a sizable entity. But once you get sort of beyond the ability to stand in the office and sort of call out danger to your team, you're into a communications problem thereafter. And your ability to react falls to your level of your training, like everything.
Jan, you have small business in your family. What kind of advice do you give to your mum and your sister about their hair salon to try and keep them on top of it?
Yeah, well, I suppose, like, with small businesses, you don't want to take the fear approach. Okay, you don't want to just scare them into it, because that's not productive. What you want to try and do is empower them and tell them, you need to do this in order to enhance your organization, to make sure that if there is an attack, you know what to do and you recover quickly. And that shows that you value your employees, you value their livelihood, and that you're going to put these measures in place. And it will, you have to be sort of realistic and tell them that, like, if they already have an IT support, talk to them and tell them that you want, like, what are our plans if something happens? What do we do if something happens? So a lot of it is just making time to have those conversations. And then those are simple things that you can do, like implementing MFA, the multi-factor authentication. If you do one thing, implement MFA across the board. Most applications let you do it quite easily. Yes, it's a pain, but it's not as much of a pain as an account takeover or an attack, and it certainly won't cost you as much in time and energy, finance, whatever. Other things I would recommend for smaller organizations is look at the standards out there, the baseline standards. In the UK, you have Cyber Essentials, which is fantastic. We are dying for something similar in Ireland. And I am assured there's something coming, but it's all going to be, it's not, they're all going to recommend the same controls. So you're basically looking at your access control, look at the MFA, look at your incident response, have those plans in place and talk to your employees. Do cyber awareness with your employees. There's lots of resources out there. Both the Ireland, Northern Ireland, UK National Cyber Security Centres have resources for cyber awareness, but it is just talk about it.
A lot of these challenges still apply, though, don't they, Robbie? Whether you're a a medium-sized business or whether you're a large business. And there is that sense, as Jan says, of overwhelm, of there just being so much going on, that whether it is purely your job or whether it is just part of your job alongside many other things, trying to A, find the time, B, try and find the brain space to make sense of it, let alone what your response to it is, can be a real challenge no matter what size of organization you are.
Jan's right. I think that there are a couple of things like multi-factor authentication, like password management, that can, take you from the sort of top quartile of risk into something that's a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
And I feel that specifically it's got to do with the level of dependence your organization has on digital. So, for example, if you're running, cash-based car washes, you're not going to have much cyber threat in your life. However, if you're a business that provides a service to bigger businesses, so if you're in a supply chain, and that supply chain goes up to something like, say, the health service, or goes to government, goes to local government, or goes to big companies, I think we are going to see, and you can see it with some of the regulations in the US and in Europe that's happening at the minute, you're going to see the risk being pushed down the supply chain. So your ability to demonstrate how seriously you take cyber will actually, I believe, in the future become an asset to saying, well, I've actually got, let's say, Cyber Essentials Plus, and the other company doesn't. And that's also something that takes it away from a price-based selling proposition. So I think we have to take into account the accountability aspect, but there also is the positive aspect. And I just don't think the governments in the next phase of cyber maturity will allow a laissez-faire approach to this. There's too many moving parts in the digital economy, and organizations, large or small, will not be allowed to play it fast and loose. I think it's akin to our road system. We all have to play to the rules. We all have to drive on, the right side of the road. We all have to respect the signals, and that's what keeps it going. And in fact, cyber risk is where they contravene those and take you off the road, and then they fleece you. So I think more and more that's going to be regulated, because the critical infrastructure doesn't exist in a bubble on its own. It exists within the overall digital architecture that we have.
And taking the road analogy another step further, or finding a parallel, maybe, we've seen legislation coming over the last 20, 25 years, maybe longer, around health and safety that has pervaded all businesses. And you can get struck off and severely reprimanded even if you are a 5-person business, if one of your members of staff, one of your workforce has a trip, has a fall in your organization, then you have a responsibility. And if you don't have the correct health and safety practices in place, if you don't have the HSE check mark or something, then you will find it difficult to engage with other businesses. You might, if you are a subcontractor, to be contracted by those bigger businesses. So some of that, I think, would be that good thing, the carrot, if you like, to Jan's stick.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you were to go back 30, 40 years, that thought process that you've just articulated wouldn't have been custom and practice within SMEs. It would have been custom and practice within, the larger process companies. But it has now percolated right the way through that value chain. I think we're in the beginning of that process where very definitely there's no large company that can say, well, I didn't know, right? They can't use that excuse. SMEs at the minute can, to a large extent, but I think even the value of us having this conversation is to sort of highlight the fact that we're on a journey, and that really for SME organizations and people communicating to SMEs, larger companies communicating to SMEs, I think the more that they change this to be custom and practice, the more that they actually de-risk their organization.
Jan, You
Yeah.
touched on this a moment ago about how one of the challenges is just engaging with SMEs in the first place. Even if there are resources that are available online, even if there are free courses that they
Yeah.
can engage in from providers, that's still a real challenge for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what I tend to do is I engage with their representative bodies and try and get through to them that way, because most organizations, like whether it's a hair salon, whether it's a pub or a retailer, they have a representative body that they get newsletters from and all this. So that's where I am focusing my attention rather than the individual organizations. Um, and and hopefully that will, if they hear it from their peer rather than, hearing it from somebody who isn't connected to them, or their IT provider, they may take more notice. The other thing that I focus, especially when I deliver courses and programs to SMEs, is this idea of being a cyber aware citizen and not just a cyber aware worker, because the attackers don't clock off at 5 o'clock. And there's a lot of overlap between the devices we use, especially with SMEs. Like, it's unlikely that an SME has a separate, especially a micro SME, has a separate device or laptop for work and home, or separate phones for work and home. They're often using the same devices. So they need to instill those cyber secure practices throughout their personal and work lives, but also talk to their parents, their kids, whatever community groups they're involved in. And that's what we need to do. We need to keep talking about it and tell people to, if they've got one of those phishing text messages, that they say, oh, did you get this one? Because, even if you say that to 2 or 3 people, chances are they'll get the same one and they won't have realized.
And Jan, I think you're absolutely right to speak to the federations, the trade associations, Federation of Small Businesses, or whoever all the plumbers are members of, or wherever you work, and so on. And speaking of plumbers, Robbie, I know that a plumber friend or a plumber that you've used in the past has I don't know if it's novel, but it certainly seems to be an effective way to sidestep some of the scams we've heard around man-in-the-middle attacks and business email compromise.
And it actually was a builder who had a problem with a plumber, or rather, he had it was the plumbing firm, of which there maybe is 2 or 3 plumbers that sort of work together on small developments, and they had a problem where it was a man-in-the-middle attack with the plumber's email, and the builder had paid him a sizable amount of money, because sometimes what happens is in those type of developments, rather than paying them on a weekly basis, they sort of run up a sizable amount of payment, and that's what's sent. And in this case, the plumber lost, I think, maybe £6,000-7,000, which is, it's a lot of months' work in that context. So from now on, I was talking to the builder, and I was amazed at his ingenuity, because he said, that'll never happen to me again. And I thought, well, how can you say that? How can you say that when the world is plagued with phishing emails and man-in-the-middle attacks? He said, well, now what happens is I send everyone £1, £1 or €1, and I leave it. And typically what happens is the plumber or the joiner will come on and go, what are you thinking? You've only sent me £1. And then I know that the bank account is valid, and then I send them the rest. And he says I also get a couple more weeks payment sort of holiday, so because by the time we get it all done, so win-win as far as the builder was concerned. But that sort of checking every time when you're making a payment, particularly to someone new, is really important. And I think also it needs to be drummed into finance people, whether it be a bookkeeper or secretary in the office who does the actual payments, that it is so strange and so weird for anyone to change their bank. That's a not something that happens very often. So if someone's giving you different details, you got to go check and ring a human being and say, did you mean to do this? But or what you do as a builder is send them a paltry amount and see what happens.
In terms of how the small businesses are typically being attacked, the actual threat vectors, we've spoken about the risk that they're at and the reasons why they might be at a heightened risk. But would you agree that email and phishing, email messaging type phishes are likely to be the kind of primary attack vector that small businesses face? Because it strikes me that they aren't going away anytime soon. So aside from more awareness, more effective security awareness training, what kind of things, Robbie, can small businesses do to, or indeed the platforms that they use do to try and mitigate this risk, try and throw out the fishes?
I think that you're right. It isn't going away anytime soon. And I think that everyone has to look at the inbound email that they receive and determine who should have email accounts for the company, because we've gone from we went from a position where everybody gets a laptop, everybody gets an email address because that's just what you get, to now them being something that is a problem. And what I'm seeing a lot in a lot of smaller industries, particularly the hospitality industry, is dedicated platforms. So it's a platform that does the timesheets for you, the timesheets, rotas for your staff. It replaces WhatsApp so that when the manager leaves the restaurant, he doesn't take everybody's contact details with him. It replaces email. So I see, as we go forward, there's going to be more platforms for industries where you actually jump on a platform and not have your own IT ecosystem yourself, because I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with a smaller business is typically you outsource your IT, you outsource who looks after your website, you outsource who looks after your email and so on, and you rely on those people. But that is something that is part and parcel of older technology. I think there's newer technologies which will have businesses in much more of a vertical bubble, so to speak.
You've just sent me back 25, 30 years to one of my first jobs for Reuters. And I remember we had an internal email system. We didn't even call it email, but it was only for internal communications. We didn't have, it was called Team Links. It was by DEC back in the day. And then I remember the excitement that I had as some people started to get at Reuters.com email addresses. And it's like, oh, we're going to be able to communicate with the outside world. Because the fact was that for the work that we did, and we were a sysadmin team, we didn't need to communicate externally at all. All of our comms were internal. So the fact that it was kind of like an email, it was just an internal messaging system. And I wonder, I really do, the extent to which for not all functions, but certainly a good number of functions, actually email it poses more risk than it creates value. And fast forwarding to not all that long ago, the last time I was working with a big client, even though we had external email, they had created those internal platforms that meant that I actually rarely used the email for my day-to-day work. It was all, again, using a closed platform with workflows built in. The challenge there, of course, Jan, is that for small and medium-sized companies, they're not going to have some of these dedicated platforms. They're not going to have a team of developers creating workflows for them. They are going to be reliant on off-the-shelf cloud services, your Gmails, your Google Workplaces, the Microsoft suites of this world. So they are going to, I guess, not have much choice but to be exposed to some of these systems.
Well, yes and no. Okay. And what I mean, back to what Robert was saying about the bank and that invoice redirect, I think a lot of the service providers, like the banks, have a part to play and have a responsibility. So instead of that plumber having to come up with his own solution, the banks should have a best practice, or, you know, they should be suggesting what their clients should be doing, but they won't take on that responsibility. And like if you've got a bank account, you've got an app. So they already have they already have the platform set up, and that's how they should be communicating with their clients. They shouldn't be sending them emails. We recently had two big issues in Ireland. Ulster Bank pulled out, and Permanent TSB rebranded. And we just got a flurry of emails from banks, and we don't have a lot of bank options in the Republic. So it's a really common tactic that's used, because you're talking about like 3 or 4 major banks here, and the chances are a third of whoever they're sending the emails are going to be clients of these particular banks, and so many of them are going to actually click on them. So I really do think, I've spoken to some of the banks before, and I said, what are you doing to help people? And they said they don't unofficially, they don't necessarily want to take it on, because then they'll be responsible if people don't actually follow it or don't follow it correctly.
I take your point. There's certainly so much more that big companies can be doing to make sure that individuals, because we're all individuals, whether you work for a small company or a big company, and small companies are kept safer. And just going back to the email thing, Robbie, emails, I mean, they're the bane of our lives anyway, but particularly when you get emails from big companies, from big administrations that tick all of those red flag boxes that turn out to be genuine, it's enough to make you tear your hair out, isn't it?
It is. And I think sometimes you get an email and you go, that's definitely a scam. That's definitely a scam. And you go directly to the company, and it turns out, no, that actually is what someone thought was a good representation of their comms. And what happens is you either have someone in marketing who has just got carried away with the fonts in their Microsoft Word, or you have someone in programming who the program worked and it didn't really have any major testing from a user experience, user interface perspective. And also you have stuff that is old, like stuff that comes from Microsoft. That system generated stuff is old stuff. And doesn't seem like they're going to change it anytime soon. So I think that, you know, we had a situation back when we had paper. I'm old enough to remember this, and a initiative called Clear English came along, which was for government to communicate to citizens in a clear English way, because what happened was the lawyers were getting involved in the letters and the marketing people, and you had in paper the same damn thing that was happening in electronic world here, which is that there isn't an awful lot of sense put into the actual comms, and there certainly isn't a connection back to how does this relate to you know, passing as a phishing email. You don't help people by creating something that is more phishing proof, if there is such a thing. But I feel that email is a perishing asset. The vast majority of companies, indeed small companies as well, have moved to Slack, have moved to Teams. So everybody's already created their closed systems. And we're basically going to phase email out to being email from you know, someone you don't know, inbound, speculative, and then all the other email or the other communication with the companies you're dealing with will be done within the company's apps. In the same way as, I mean, the banks are sort of there with the actual banking app, in that you know, you go into the app and you do your transactions, and they will communicate to you within the app. But I think you're going to see a much more considered move into those closed platforms.
I think we should probably just start to wrap things up now and bring a lot of the different threads that we've spoken about around small businesses together. And if for all the reasons that we've discussed, SMEs are more vulnerable to attack or to successful attacks than larger companies, then what really is out there? What are the first steps that are available out there for them in terms of programs, in terms of advice, and in terms of training? Because I guess one of the challenges is that because of the types of work that they do, very often they don't have to tick all of the, have ISO, whatever it is, or to have some of these cyber qualifications, cyber essentials, or whatever it is. So what are the different carrots? What are the different sticks that can make sure that an SME, Jan, is going to invest some time, some of that really limited resource into making sure they are as bulletproof as possible? What are those starting points?
Well, if they're asking those questions, then they're already halfway there, because it's now on their radar. They're aware of it. They know it needs to be tackled, and then they just need to be proactive about it. So what I often do is I'll just direct people to their own national cybersecurity centres. So the UK one is really good. It has a whole load of resources for small, medium enterprise, schools, charities, everything. The Northern Irish one is similar. And then the Irish one, even though the Irish National Cybersecurity Centre focuses on public services, they're expanding their reach, and they're doing better all the time. And they do have resources, dedicated resources and advice for SMEs. That's the first place I'd send them. And then from there, they have a good idea of what they need to do, but they still have to do it. So they're going to have to, realize that they need to take time, maybe a little bit of money, to put things in place. Because if you're looking at people, processes, technology, they're going to have to invest in their people, the awareness. They're going to have to be, put time aside to do it. Whatever processes, so they need to go through, if they want to, do the likes of cyber essentials are similar. That will take time, and then with the processes or with the technology, again, it might be some sort of investment, or it might be just using the tools they already have access to that they're not aware of. Because if they're using Office 365, if they're using Google Workspace, they already have a lot of resources or a lot of tools in there that they can just implement. And then if any of their applications will have, at the very least, they'll have multi-factor authentication. And then the last thing they do is plan for incidents, know what to do when the worst happens, and expect it to happen. Don't think it's never going to happen. Expect it's going to happen. And this is a positive thing to do. You'll feel so much better. You feel so empowered that you have these measures in place. But yeah, that's what I would say. That's the starting point.
Failing to plan is planning to fail, and all of that. Robbie, anything to build on from what, or to reiterate from what Jan had to say there in terms of resources, in terms of engagement for time-strapped, cash-strapped SMEs?
I mean, just to build on what Jan said, the National Cybersecurity Centre has some fantastic resources on their website, and some impressive stuff that's easy to read. And then I think this is backed up but in the various regions with specialist police expertise, like Cyber Griffin in the City of London, where you actually have dedicated officers who will go out, speak at SME events, and even help organizations with their incident response, and it's all gratis free. So I think that is a big change in 10 years ago, where really even reporting incidents to police was a problem. I think the increase in fraud, online fraud, is so astounding that the kick in the door with a shotgun is so last century. This is the way that people defraud and scam the populace. So I think this is starting to move in that direction, and that's really positive. In terms of other advice to small businesses, I think if you were to just talk about IT, the most important thing after keeping the lights on from a digital perspective is your backups, right? And that prior to connecting everything to the big old dirty internet was your backups. And the worst thing that could happen with your backups was you could have a fire, and so then you had a fireproof safe, right? Or you had offsite back, and on and on and on and on and all of the different things. Well, really, cybersecurity is really similar to that, other than instead of a fire, you have this offensive criminal aspect that is trying to mess things up. And so, like, one of the things that you still should be really cognizant of is your backups. So if your backups are connected on a regular basis to your internal infrastructure, so if you have a small network or something like that, and typically if you get hit with ransomware, those backups are done as well. So for small business in particular, I think it's worth, if I was go to one thing, which is get you out of jail guaranteed, is make sure that your backups are in some way, there's an air gap between your backups and your day-to-day business. And how much could you lose? Could you lose a day's work? Could you lose a week's work? And we're back to that, because the worst small business incidents that I've seen is where the backups have been corrupted with ransomware as well. And it's good night, Irene. There's nothing there. And that's very sad, because you just have to pay the ransomware or take the hit.
Robbie, as you know, that is all music to my ears. And
Yes.
recovery point, recovery time objectives, the old 3-2-1 rule, and make sure that one is an offsite disconnected copy. And the final thing I will leave with is a backup isn't a backup until you've recovered from it. So back to the planning piece. Every now and then, just make sure that you can do a restore from that backup that you think that you have. Dropbox is not a backup. Anyone who's been involved in any data corruption, ransomware, or whatever will tell you that. Yet it's still obviously used for good purposes by many small businesses. Anyway, I could talk about backups for an entire webinar, but that's a different show. Today, I think we're going to leave it for this show. Jan, terrific to have you on the show today. Tell us, where can people find out more about you and your work and your nuggets of advice for small businesses and big ones online?
Yes, so I have a website at fortifyinstitute.com, and I also work with UCD Professional Academy. So you can get me there, and yeah.
Super stuff. Thank you very much. And well, Robbie, all the different things you do, where is the best place to keep up with what you get up to, along with the rest of the Meta Compliance team?
The best place to see what's happening with us is at metacompliance.com. But I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so people can reach out and contact me there.
Super stuff. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today and chatting us through the perils and, well, hopefully that slither of hope that Robbie promised us at the beginning of the show about how small businesses can indeed manage this avalanche of attacks coming from all quarters. Thank you very much for joining us, Jan.
Thank you, David. Thanks,
and thank you for joining us too, Robbie.
As always, David, thank you. Talk to you soon.
And thank you all for being with us today. Until next time, bye-bye.